As usual, start with 10 or 15 minutes of silence. Concentrate fully on your breathing. Develop distinct awareness of your breathing. Distinct awareness of your breathing. The awareness of incoming breath as it comes in, outgoing breath as it goes out. Continuously. So your mind is fully focused on the present moment of your mind, the present moment of the breath, the awareness of breathing. As it comes in, as it goes out. If it is deep, you're aware it is deep. If it is shallow, you're aware it is shallow. If it is soft, you're aware it is soft. If it is hard, you're aware it is hard. Develop distinct awareness, uninterrupted awareness. Along with the awareness of breathing, the sensation that is around your mouth, at the entrance of the nose, inside the walls of the nose, where the breath touches. Just focusing on those two, the sensation around your mouth, where the breath touches, incoming breath touches, outgoing breath touches. If you don't feel that sensation, keep working with the breathing, working on your breathing. While observing your breath, while the breath is the primary object of your meditation, you will notice that your mind wanders constantly, wanders away constantly. So mindfulness of mind becomes very important too. Mindfulness of thoughts that arises in the mind are also the object of your meditation, although not primary. Therefore, whenever your mind wanders, try to catch that in action without reaction. Observe and watch the mind, wandering mind. And as quickly as possible, bring it back on your breathing. When mind wanders, you're aware that your mind wanders. And you might get lost in that thought. 5 minutes, sometimes even more than that, 10 minutes. Try to minimize that loss. Try to regain your consciousness, awareness as quickly as possible. As soon as your mind wanders, you're aware it wanders. And then bring it back on your breathing. The awareness of breathing. But let there be no reaction. Let there be no sense of disappointment or frustration. Because then you will be reacting out of aversion, out of hatred, because you didn't like the mind being distracted. So instead of reacting against it with aversion, sense of disappointment, or frustration, Just recognize wandering, distracting moment of your mind. And with full awareness, calmly, quietly bring it back. This is mindfulness of mind, mindfulness of thought, essential, integral part of meditation. And if you constantly, persistently sustain your awareness of your breathing, of your respiration, you will notice yourself that mind gradually becomes calmer, more single-pointed. Even if it wanders for a short moment of time, you will gain your consciousness quickly. And without any reaction, you will be able to accept that this is the reality of my mind, this moment. So better observe as it is. If it wanders, you observe. If it stays focused, you observe. If the awareness of breath is so clear, crystal clear, you observe. If the awareness is clouded, misty, you observe. Simply observe. Observe without preferences, without any prejudice. Sometimes your breath is hard, other times it is soft, sometimes deep, sometimes shallow. It just occurs, happens in its own way. We observe it without regulating. We observe nature as it expresses itself. That is the truth. This is how we train to become calmer, more in tune with the reality, gradually freeing ourselves from our own biases, our prejudices, our preferences. Keep observing, keep observing. Go as much depth as possible deep as possible. It all comes down to your hard work. And working properly with proper technique. This breath will take you deep, deep, at the deepest level of your reality within yourself. Learn how to observe this. The subtlest reality of consciousness, subtlest level of consciousness. The only way we can go at that depth is through the medium of your own breathing, life supporting oxygen, the breath that you take in and out. Keep observing, keep observing. Continuously, uninterruptedly. There is no life without this life-giving energy, the air, the oxygen. Subtlest reality of mind expresses itself through the subtlest wind, subtlest energy. Which is a deeper level of the energy that we observe at the moment. The air that comes in, goes out. That keeps us alive as a sentient. Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay. So we got this session and next session, and then I haven't discussed with you, Lindy, but I'm hoping that we will be able to wrap up the whole thing this session and next session. Is that okay? Because in December I won't be here. Well, December I will be here, but I think usually we close this in December. December is holidays. Yes. So the aim is try to finish the Lotus Sutra, and I have a plan. I think so let me okay, so before I start, Lynn, do you have anything?
No, nothing, no announcements or anything,
Okay.
just thank you.
All right, so so this sitting and exit sitting, and the plan is to wrap this up in next sitting. So what I'm going to do is actually I read quite a bit, and there is actually not a great deal that we haven't gone through. There are no new interesting contents like that that we came across last sitting, like Devdada's events, unusual in any suttas. The fact that Buddha prophesied Devdada, and Buddha, basically acknowledged that Devdada has been his teacher. These are new revelations. That's actually exciting part of this sutra. And not only that, the prophecy of Gotami, Yashodhara, all the bhikkhunis. These are important prophecy, full enlightenment, prophecy. And these are important, not and also as a content, but also from the Buddhist studies point of view, because they are nowadays always people are always wanting to see if these religious traditions are egalitarian, or at least at least there is some sort of non-sexist content. So those content important, even from that kind of contemporary perspective, where many Buddhist studies scholars, of course, have explored the issues whether Buddha is, misogynist. Some people do think that Buddha is a misogynist. Of course, some sutras give you that idea. So if you think that, okay, female Buddhists are holy, sort of dirty thing, and then if they don't talk about male Buddhists, if it is a kind of pure pristine, then of course it does give you this, this kind of interpretation. But whereas if you try to see the Buddhist teaching as a whole, this sutra gives you an interesting reading and account. So these are important. The prophecy not only of the male disciples, male followers, but also all female followers, for the fact that all of them will become fully enlightened Buddhas. And then Yashodhara and Gotami, remember they followers, thousands of nuns, Yashodhara and Gotami, when they become Buddha, Buddha said that they are going to prophesize the disciples, disciple nuns, full enlightenment. So Buddha didn't, of course, prophesize specifically what type of where the names and so forth, but generally when Buddha prophesies, Buddha's prophecy actually involves also naming out those Buddha or Tathagata. So these are actually, I think, interesting, at least from Buddhist studies perspective. Not necessarily from, I don't know, maybe it has something to do with the Buddhist practice, because if you get inspired, especially if you dedicate Mahayanas, if you think that you are Mahayanas, and if you are inspired by Mahayana doctrinally and philosophically, these might matter, because but if you are told that, oh yeah, of course you're female, you have a female body, unless you relinquish your female body, you won't be able to become fully enlightened. That might possibly, who knows, discourage. But one thing that Sutta does not go I mean, suppose Tantra might be the extra bonus that is lay ahead, that's lay ahead. Because Tantra would say, okay, so even in these sutras, most of the time, when the female bodhisattvas become Buddha, eventually they actually transform the female body into a male body. Now, question is whether Buddha is a male or female. I think that's an interesting question, because Buddha could be androgynous. It doesn't matter whether at that point whether because after all, whether you don't have any sexual desires, whether it is a kind of male kind of sexual desire, female kind of desires, or maybe neutral kind of desires, that would be a very maybe a different. It might belong. Buddha's body might belong to a different kind of category. Neither male nor female. And now, of course, it's a contemporary dilemma in the society where he and she is not a complete exhaustive pronoun. Now you need they or them or something else. I don't know. So it's actually it poses some interesting problems. So these so from that point of view, cultural standpoint of view, also I think that makes that kind of content interesting. Okay. So then how are we going to do it? Because I think otherwise there's no way that we will be able to finish. What I'm going to do is we will actually go through this I'm going to share you the screen. And which screen? The question is maybe the Chrome. Okay, let's see what's in there. Chrome. If I share you the Chrome, okay, good. So I think instead of going through the chapter, because there are nothing, dramatically new, and nothing, not too sort of revolutionary ideas, I think we could actually go through the summary that translators provided, each chapter summary. So I think if for the remainder session, if you stick to and then go through this summary, I think that might not only give you the compact of message of each chapters, but wherever it is, there are some crucial passages, I think that more worth noting, then of course we refer to them. Okay, is that okay? Okay, yeah. Otherwise, of course, there is no way that we will be able to finish. And not only that, of course, I think, finishing is a good thing because we can start something new, exciting, and next year. But most important, I think the contents are sort of something that we have already met, mostly to do with matters making and things like that. Okay, so and the chapter starts with the 14th. I think we have to go back quite a bit. Oh, even the 13th chapters, dwelling in happiness. So dwelling in happiness chapter, basically here, remember this chapter 12 resolution. That's an important chapter from gender study perspective. And that's another discipline, gender studies perspective. What's the image that is presented of femininity in Buddhist tradition, Buddhist teaching? This sutta gives an interesting read, of course, about Yashodhara and Kishakodama and those things. So there is no, at least insofar as sociological project is concerned, there is no discrimination. Except you might say, okay, why is it then if there is no discrimination, why is it that actually female body has to be transformed to male body? But the question is, why should we, it's presumed that Buddha's body is a male? That's a question that actually quite unresolved. Now, because that means actually we need to think, problematize this category that we have already, sort of convention, male, female, because that of course now is obviously a problem. Even the society, most of the society in the West recognizes this. So we will need to think outside this normativity where he or she is usually the norm. But now, of course, you need a different noun. English language doesn't provide that noun. What is between he and she? I don't know. There is. So maybe they, we, these sort of things. I think language problem. But also in terms of when think about Buddha's body, perfectly enlightened being, freed from any sort of craving with respect to one's identity, with respect to femininity or masculinity, because Buddha's transcended all this craving. That means because Buddha is the resultant, Buddha's body is a result of the transcendent, or at least a freedom. Right? So in that sense, we might need a different type of noun to express Buddha's body. And this is actually quite fitting, because generally when you look into modern, let's say, Western perspective, even with regard to mind-body relationship, most of the philosophers, or even the psychologists to a certain extent, even the neuroscientists, they always either think that you are just pure body or you're pure mind. There is no in between. And in between, of course, if you think that in between is more like uncomfortable mix between the pure Atman, pure sort of spirit, immutable, unchanging mind, sort of trapped in this body. That's how people actually in the West, even the Western philosophers, after Descartes, political Cartesian, they thought that's the relationship with the body and mind. We are just, there's a mind, something mind, that a solid entity that actually trapped within the body, and the body is particularly just purely physical, mind is entirely non-physical. People thought that, of course, but then, of course, when you deny that, many of the scientists actually, when they react to that kind of category, they thought, okay, there is no such thing called mind that is independent of the brain. So they basically chuck out the whole notion of the independence or existence of mind. Their consciousness, for them, consciousness is just a brain state. So either you are basically you buy the dualistic substantialist model, or you become totally monist and you become physicalist or materialist. So that's the dominant paradigm in relation to mind-body problem. Right? In fact, it's called mind-body problem. But Buddhism offers a different picture. Buddhism says human beings are neither body nor mind. There's a third category. Now this is important. Neither mind no body, of course, doesn't presupposes the notion of mind and body that is developed in the West, particularly Western philosophers like Descartes, even Plato. And if you go into the Western, ancient Greek tradition, of course, there is Aristotle's picture might be a little bit more closer to Buddhist idea. Plato's idea much more closer to Hindu traditional, and maybe Western, even more monotheistic tradition, because where there, mind and body are totally understood separate. And you could take that action peek to Socrates. In fact, Socrates, when he was given hemlock, he was executed. Then he said, "Well, you can kill me, but you can kill only my body, but my mind, you can't kill me because it's immortal, permanent." That's actually, you can see Plato's Apologies. If you read, you'll see that actually goes way back. Now, Buddhists basically mind-body relation doesn't fit in that category, because Buddhists, of course, you use this word called mind-body. So even, in fact, sorry, that's a wrong way to start. Buddhist texts use called nama rupa. Nama rupa is always a compound. Okay, nama means those aggregates that are mental. Rupa are those aggregates that are physical, but they're always joined with a parenthesis as a compound statement. That means there is no mind that can be distinctly distinct from the physical, and there is no physical body that can be purely physical and that can be isolated from mind. Now that's important, because if that is how Buddha identifies the relation mind and body, and then if the that relationship, if you brought up in the contemporary discussion, you have to make sure that actually that discussion is situated completely in a let's put it this way, a neutral category that does not presuppose Western or maybe Western or monotheistic paradigm of mind-body relationship, where mind and body are always sort of having this friction, sort of mind somehow independent, immutable, unchanging, body constantly changing, and somehow there is unease, tension. Buddhist texts never understood this, these two as having tension, because they have a symbiotic relationship. They cannot exist from each other. Now that connects with the talk that I was, at least sort of the discussion that we were having when we meditated, the relationship between the observation, the breath and your mind, consciousness. Breath is a physical. Consciousness is supposed to be non-physical. But you know that we can only exist, so there is so-called life only when you are able to breathe. Only when there's a life-supporting energy named called oxygen. If oxygen does not exist, there is no such thing called life. So there is no such thing consciousness. What this means is, even at the deeper level in Kalchakra Tantra and Ahaya Tantras, Buddhists support a non-dual relationship with mind and body, and that's important. Which means mind and physical, mind and something that is physical, especially the oxygen, cannot be separated from each other. In fact, mind is able to make its move, go from one place to another, or at least precisely because of the movement of oxygen, the air, right? So that is also, that discussion is kind of, I think, related here, to understand, to appreciate what we mean by Buddhist body. Anyway, sorry, that's some kind of point that is related to the problem of trying to understand the relationship Buddha body within the context of this binary problematic category of male and female. Either you have to be male or a female, that's already problematic. So you have something that is, you need a category that is transcendent of those gender biases. And transgender doesn't work too there, because transgendered generally, of course, are still, I would say, obsessed with their own identity. A Buddha is supposed to be somebody who actually has no identity issues, has transcended identity issues. So therefore, Buddhas cannot be, Buddha body or Buddhas cannot be represented as some beings who are trapped in the body or some sort of identity, the issues that they are that they haven't resolved, which is poses an interesting question. Anyway, okay, so now let's look at this one, dwelling happiness. Now here in this case, chapter 13, dwelling happiness, Manjushri asked the Buddha how Bodhisattva should teach the sutra in the future. Of course, the sutra is the Lotus Sutra that we are talking about. And the Buddha says that they should have 4 qualities. The teacher of the sutra should have 4 qualities. One is that, I mean, they basically, assumption is they are all bodhisattvas. First, in terms of the practice, they should have self-control and see correctly the characteristic of phenomena. In terms of their field of activity, they should stay apart from society and worldly life. And in particular, avoid attraction to women. That's immediately sort of, in a sense, problematize what we just discussed before. Because then it looks like these actually people who teaches Lotus Sutra are always going to be male bodhisattvas. But on the other hand, you can apply this reverse, right? So if the teachers of the Lotus Sutras are bodhisattvas, so if they are female bodhisattvas, they of course have to avoid being attracted to a male. So that actually logic can be applied. I don't think there's going to be a much problem. I think the point here is self-mastery. First, basically, the quality they need is the self-mastery, self-control, which essentially control of our own mind, right? And we know how difficult that it is. When you just sit and 5 minutes and you can see how much control, the mastery that we have with regard to our thought, that will clearly tell us how much mastery we have. Because self-control, self-mastery is all about mastery of our mind. Therefore, of course, meditation is considered as most important in Buddhist tradition, Buddhist practice, because meditation allows the Shila to be strong, and Shila allows meditation to be strong. And without meditation, without samadhi, self-mastery, it is not possible to develop panya, wisdom. So those three are very important. And the second qualities is that they should see the emptiness of phenomena. Now this, of course, remember there's a Mahayana tradition. So Mahayana, generally when we think about these three vehicles, so or if you basically divide this into so-called greater vehicle and a smaller vehicle, in the smaller vehicle, the emphasis is about emptiness, so emphasis about non-self and impermanence, right? And that is the case because usually you have to move forward. You have to move forward for starting from impermanence. If we have no understanding of impermanence, there is no way we can understand non-self. The idea of non-self makes no sense if we really don't have understanding of what impermanence. The idea that things are constantly changing and they just everything is just a relation. Everything is interdependent relations or matrix. Now, if we are able to understand that, then we can understand that there is no essence of anything, whether essence with regard to person or essence with regard to phenomena. So of course, then if we take this a little bit further, then of course the emptiness becomes more easy to understand. But from meditative standpoint, of course, the starting point has to be impermanence. And that in order to understand that impermanence, one has to at least establish, warrant that awareness within one's own perspective, one's own body. Because looking at a tree falling, looking at rain falling, looking at people dying, these are just ordinary intuitions. They don't sometimes give us insight of how things are impermanent, but actually they don't give us a deep understanding. The depth understanding has to come from direct phenomenological first-person experience, and that means you have to understand that, develop that understanding of impermanence within the body, within the framework of the body. In one sutra, Buddha says that Buddha was approached by a person who has a miraculous miraculous power to travel to the speed of light. And he said he went to Buddha, and Buddha says, "I'm going to transcend this universe by walking from one end of the universe to another end of the universe." And Buddha said, "This is crazy." He says, "Instead of doing that, just finish the walk from the top of the head to the tip of your toes." And he said, "This is exactly one." And he used the word, in fact, fathom long body. He says, within this fathom long body, there is everything in the universe. Everything is, and this is your fathom long body. Each individual fathom long body. He says, the whole cosmos is here. Within your fathom long body, the whole cosmos, arising of cosmos, cessation of cosmos, everything is here. Finish this journey from the top of the head to the tip of the toes, and then you will be able to transcend. But not by walking, not by flight. So in the same way, I think, understand the impermanence. And this, I would say, distinct the Buddhist approach. Otherwise, it becomes just a philosophy. Just like people actually do philosophy in the West. Purely intellectual exercise. Just purely as a rational reasoning type of exercises that has no bearing with the first-person direct experience. If you don't anchor our understanding there, then of course, there is no transformation. Philosophers don't necessarily get transformed just because they philosophize. The reason being because there is no connection with experience. Their understanding has to be based on experience. And then, of course, with the experience, in this case, experience is fundamental because you are bodhisattva. Buddhism is deeply committed to the welfare of beings. Now, and how does that come about? By direct understanding emptiness, because direct understanding emptiness allows us to shatter, or at least basically transcend, allows us to transcend from our egocentricity, from a deep-seated egocentricity. So therefore, emptiness is important, because it is this emptiness, direct experience of emptiness, that allows us, enable us to rise above our, our selfish interest, and therefore, of course, taking the interest of the greater good for all beings, and that's bodhisattva commitment. And then the third one says they should also remain in a state of happiness and never criticize others. Now, this is going to be difficult unless and until one is already one has transcended egocentricity. So usually when we think about from the sense of egocentricity, because egocentricity is some more or less like say that I'm sure you have a moment in your life when you are you're asked to do some presentation or something, and then all of a sudden you become very self-conscious. If you don't prepare and just do the presentation, you don't get self-conscious. You just say anything what comes in your mind, and it becomes natural. It quite actually, presentation can be quite nice and fluid and flexible. Whereas if you are asked to do something and then you try to prepare because you want to make the best impression, and when this sense of self comes in, this is the sense of self. You want to present the best of you, and when you become self-consciousness, and when you become self-consciousness, well, when you become self-conscious, actually brings a worst part of you, actually sometimes worst part of you. Then you become nervous, and you get up there and you forgot what you wanted to say, because you are actually trying to act unnatural. You're not trying to act something. Whereas if you are basically, it becomes a natural, which is the job of this meditation. So that meditation deconstruct this unnatural concoction that we learn in this community. In the society, we learn how to behave. We learn how to discipline, but force discipline. What meditation does, actually get rid of all these superficial layers, and basically make people just as natural as possible. Return them back to the nature. Because we are in a society, we so-called civilization, civic society, we are taught so many things and made to believe so many things and made to live those ideas at the level of head. And we really don't know how to live naturally. When meditation, its job is to get rid of all this rubbish, the intellectual rubbish, and then basically and live our life as naturally as possible. So if that happens because of meditation, then egocentrism goes away. And then, of course, what happens is the patience, generosity, and the sense of, let's say, superiority, inferiority, those will automatically leave. They one transcend those kind of complexes. And as a result, of course, when people criticize, they don't get offended. Look at Buddha's own life, how much he was criticized, and even often tried to be killed or attacked in his life. But there was never a moment in Buddha's life, event that we know that he lost his mental balance. Right? We lose mental balance because when we criticize, we get offended, because we get offended because of our sense of I. Now, somebody who's transcended the sense of I only can basically rationally adjust, and not only adjust, but assess the situation, and then, of course, never lose. In fact, there were many cases where Buddha was abused so many times by Brahmins, because those days Buddha was a new person on the block, and because Buddha's teaching was so beautiful, everybody flocked to him. And but the Brahmins, most of those students were, of course, students of different Brahmins. Then the Brahmin teachers would go to the Buddha and then basically rebuke him or try to humiliate him in front of so many public. And Buddha would just sit there and smile, and then he would say, "Okay, Brahmin friend, are you okay now?" And he would say, "You have given me the gift, famous, a very precious gift, and I'm not taking it with you. I mean, remember this important event, Bharadwaj, another important event in Buddha's life. Actually, he lost all his disciples to Buddha because people and all his disciples go and said, "Okay, I'll bring him." He promised. They promised his teachers they will bring, but each time when they go, they basically staying with the Buddha. And then one day, of course, Bharadwaj could not tolerate. Now he himself has to go because all the disciples left him. And then he goes, and then abusing. And Buddha says, "Sit down, old man. What happened?" And then he says, "You brought me a gift of abuse, and I'm not accepting any of your gift. They are with you," says. Of course, this is very wise. I mean, very difficult for us. You can understand this. But that this Bharadwaj was not a sort of a stupid guy. He straight away basically realized the deep insight Buddha was about to reveal to him. And then said, "Okay, what do you mean?" And then, of course, tells the story. And he says, "Old man, what happens if you present a gift to your friend, and then friend didn't accept?" And then Buddha said, the old man said, "Of course, well, of course, he didn't accept, and he will stay with me." And this is what Buddha said. "This is exactly what I'm doing. You gave me the gift of abuse. I'm not taking it. It is with you." Now, of course, that means if it is the gift of the abuse becomes a gift, somebody accepts it only when you are criticized and you get offended and start retaliating. And that's when we basically become not only accept somebody's gift of offense or humiliation or racism or ridicule, but we always accept those gifts. Not accepting is a very difficult challenge because we think that our ego is, we think that our identity, our integrity is being hurt. Buddha, of course, does not think that way. There is no way that abuse can verbal abuse can undermine somebody's integrity. It can undermine one's integrity only if we allow it. If we accept that abuse, then of course we get offended, and then we lose our mental balance. As a result, of course, then we try to retaliate. So anyway, that Bharadwaj, because when Buddha said, "How do we know this? How did you know this?" We were so surprised. And then, of course, Buddha said, "Sit down, I'll teach you the technique. Observe your breath, observe body sensation." that sort of technique, right? Anyway, so that's the third quality of not being ability of restraining or ability to stay mentally calm and composed when you are criticized. They should not be discouraged by people by saying that they are unable to attain enlightenment. Now, this is also probably for the practitioner, this is one of the most challenging bit, because you will be constantly criticized by a person. You have been meditator, you have been, this person, you have been meditating and you have been doing do this practice and you are still the same person. What are you doing? You are on the wrong path or something like that. I mean, this sort of criticism can be very devastating sometimes. People may stop. Now, for the practitioners who really know themselves deeply and their practice actually helps, should not be discouraged by this kind of, and they should even think reverse. They should say, "Okay, yeah, yes, I get offended by somebody's criticizing me. So it means I have still a long way to go. I should still work harder rather than being affected and stop practicing." You actually have to take the lesson reverse. Somebody says you something nasty thing, and you get irritated. Realize now, "Oh, I still get irritated. That means I have still a long way to go. Now I have to work harder." So that's how the practitioners should actually take the lessons, and that's why I remember Buddha's way of taking Devdata as a teacher, Kalyan Mitra, benevolent teacher, is because somebody who can always says you nasty thing doesn't actually help us much. somebody actually who tests us and challenges us, literally help us to grow, right? I mean, sometimes you have to have the teacher who actually does both, encourages you, but at the same time points your mistake so that you can do something to rectify the mistake. Otherwise, I mean, Buddhist project is not just like this life, just finishing some, manuscript or writing some piece. If that's that's a different case. But Buddhist project is a project that of total transformation, deep transformation. If you get irritated because somebody said so, there's a job to be done. If you get miserly because there is some person needed, and you somehow feel a little bit, and we feel some sort of sense of keeping that money to ourselves, there's a job. Still job need to be done, and these are the lessons that we can learn only when we are tested. Okay. So they should also refrain from others, but have a compassion for them and wish to attain Buddhahood as to liberate them. Of course, that's the Bodhisattva commitment, to liberate all beings from cycle of life, death, and life and death. Buddha then prophesies that such Bodhisattva will be greatly revered by humans and devas. The Buddha gives the parable of king rewarding heroic warriors with all kinds of gifts, and finally giving his crush jewels. Because crush jewel basically symbolizes the ultimate Buddhayana, right? Because that's eventually, of course, you give different kinds of gifts to satisfy, to make them happy, and then eventually you give the best, save the best at the end. Just like the Buddha's skill of leading disciples from Shravaka, Shravakayana first, Buddha, and then Bodhisattva, and then ultimately Buddhayana. Buddha explains that in the same way he has taught many sutras to those battling Mara, but his final marvelous gift is this sutra. So this sutra actually, you could say, is represent this particular sense the crush jewel, giving this sutra as the final teaching. His final teaching that he kept secret until his moment, and therefore, of course, many of his disciples get shocked when he revealed this sutra. Anyway, so that's the chapter 13. I thought it would take less, but let's take it a bit. Any questions? Okay, so if I take it that there is no further questions, so then let's move to the chapter 14. Chapter 14, Bodhisattva was emerging out of the ground. Now, remember now, of course, Buddha said that crush jewel that he is going to reveal ultimately is this sutra, Lotus Sutra, and the teaching of Lotus Sutra, because teaching of Lotus Sutra in the end teaches one vehicle, that there is only one vehicle in the end. Every other vehicles are just expedient teachings. There is a final teaching is that of Buddhayana. Now, so then who's going to teach this sutra after Buddha passing away? At the moment when Buddha is around, of course, Buddha teaches, gives the teaching of the sutra. And then the question is, what happens when the Buddha enters in Parinibbana? When Buddha dies, what will happen? Who will teach? So the Bodhisattva who came from the other world system make the commitment to teach the sutra in the future. So then, of course, Bodhisattva shows up from different realms, not the Saha, the universe that we belong, but from different world system. Come out, all over from all over the other continents, and then say, okay, we will maintain the sutra, we will do the teaching. And Buddha says, no, actually, we do have enough people who can do this teaching here in this Saha universe. Buddha says it will not be necessary, as he has so many bodhisattvas in his realm. Immediately the ground splits open, and out from the ground comes countless bodhisattvas who dwell in the space below the world. People might find this kind of interestingly entertaining. We have no idea of what's happening here, especially if you have a very scientific driven world with a very, one-dimensional sort of picture, then these things, of course, would make no sense. But if you accept the multidimensional universe, possibilities, quantum mechanic type, which aligns well with the Buddhist worldview, and not only that, Buddhist actually metaphysics of emptiness, which says everything is possible where emptiness is possible, because things don't have solidity. So, which means things don't have solidity. They are nimble, flexible, and they can become like anything. I usually say emptiness is like a Play-Doh. Right? If you Play-Doh, if you make a choice, if you Play-Doh made from elephant made from Play-Doh or elephant made from marble, most people will say, "Whoa, marble is nice. I want to have a elephant made of marble." But Madhyamika, or especially Mahayana picture is no. Elephant made from Play-Doh is much better, because then you can make not only marble elephant, you can make actually any tiger, dog, monkey, humans, devas, Avalokiteshvara, Buddha. You can make any of these, and the emptiness actually, the flexibility of emptiness as a reality gives this opportunity that you literally can make anything, because the Play-Doh itself doesn't have any specific identity. Otherwise, if it's a fixed marble, you can break, and once it's broken, you can't bring it back. Whereas Play-Doh, of course, so flexible, and that's the picture of the Buddhist universe, very flexible. And therefore, sometimes I can become dog, I can become platypus, I can come in the Tasmania and become wombat. Other times I can go up in the Tibet, it's a Tibetan reindeer, or maybe antelope. This flexibility, what do we call ontological, and and people may not like this. This, of course, you must say, oh, if you don't accept rebirth, that's a problem. But you really don't have to accept this rebirth. But you have to accept the idea that nothing cannot be created new. Sorry, things cannot be created from nothing, and something cannot be reduced to nothing. That's the Buddhist picture of the world. So Buddhists cannot accept ex nihilo. So the universe, remember, the scientific and picture is, well, either it's Big Bang theory or just universe emerged from there, nowhere. Buddhists would not accept that, because you can't give an example, anything. Otherwise, you can see, or is it possible that you can have an elephant made out of Pegasus or a unicorn? People will say, no. Why? Because Pegasus don't exist. Unicorn don't exist. So that means something cannot be created from nothing. Now, whatever is already created cannot be made from nothing, cannot made into nothing. In other words, usually people understand death as becoming death as something becoming nothing, and birth is becoming something from nothing. That's how people understand, and therefore people take death as such a scary thing, because you become annihilated. You just cease to exist. Buddhists don't accept that. Why? Well, Buddhists will say, look, are you able to make anything non-existent? Try this piece of paper. You must say, okay, yeah, you can get rid of this paper, make it non-existent. How? You can burn it. Now, when you burn this paper, it becomes something. It doesn't become nothing. You can burn it and it reduces into ash, so it changes its state, but continues still. So Buddhist world is continuity of transformation, transformed continuity. That's what it is. Transformation and continuity, that's the universe, Buddhist universe, which means nothing can be created out of nothing, or something cannot be created out of nothing, and something cannot be made nothing, which means death is not annihilation. Death is not just disappearing into nothingness, which means actually we don't die. That must sound strange, but we must say, oh, we do die. So when you look at this, even let's say when we die, we just think, okay, everything, what is death? Well, death is transformation. Your body, type of body, you just, maybe earth element returns to earth. The air that is in there becomes a part of earth, air. Fire becomes part of fire. Space becomes part of space. Water becomes part of water. And maybe if I get decomposed and completely dried up, part of the cloud. So my existence actually becomes a part of cloud. My existence becomes a part of earth. And then what happens? That earth gradually gives rise to a plant, and my existence in the plants. It's in the leaf, it's in the bark, it's in the bud, it's in the flower. I haven't disappeared. I'm not disappeared. Or so now, if this is how death happens, because then death is a transformation. Birth is a transformation, which means there is no death. Strictly speaking, there is no death that annihilates. Because our ordinary notion of death is basically death as an annihilation, and birth is becoming just an opposite. Birth is becoming something out of nothing, ex nihilo, and death is becoming nothing out of something. Now, if you basically get rid of that notion and think differently, the way Buddha thought, or the way Buddhists thought thinking, then the world is fundamentally different. Now, life and death both are actually continuation and transformation. That's all there is to it. Only thing is that they will transform, they will change. So if you look at that way, even if you don't take Buddhist theory of rebirth seriously, you do see that actually death in a fundamentally different light. Now, if you do this, then of course we are not annihilated. Nothing gets annihilated. Now, so then this is important. Why? Because even Buddha says, remember Buddha said he became enlightened millions and millions of years ago, but he's still here. You could ask, how is this possible? He died millions of years and he's still come here and again and again. Do the teaching for us? You must say, okay, that means Buddha is permanent. No, it is actually impermanent and flexible, constant changing, constant transformation nature of the universe actually allows this to happen. So now Buddha has been there for billions of years. So are we. We have been there billions of years, sometimes in the form of maybe mountains, sometimes in the form of cloud, some of them from the plants, some of them, form of different lives. They are lives. Now, okay, so you must say, okay, if we think this way, then I think we have a different, much more less flexible way to think about what life and what death is. And then if you apply the same concept to Buddha, of course, we can get a different picture. Okay. So anyway, in this direct question, immediately hit the ground split. Okay, so the four main ones among these, basically Buddha names out these four main bodhisattvas: Vishishta Charitra, Ananta Charitra, Vishuddha Charitra, and Pratistita Charitra. These will be basically the mostly the teachers who is going to propagate the sutra, Lotus Sutra. Maitreya asked the Buddha who these bodhisattvas are, whom no one has even seen before. The Buddha says that they were all brought into the path of enlightenment by himself after they attained Buddhahood. Basically, Buddha announced that these bodhisattvas were actually his own students. And they are already enlightened, because they are only enlightened and following his own footpath. Maitreya stated that these bodhisattvas have been practicing for aeons. Now here is again the same concept. Aeons, and this is like a young man introducing 100-year-old man as his sons. Now, of course, there's, remember now, these bodhisattvas, Buddhas were already Buddha long millions of years ago, and they happened to Buddha's own disciple. Now Buddha is introducing them in this life to us. So it's not, it sounds like the analogy here is that if you have to introduce 100-year-old guy as your own son, and you were, let's say, in 50s, paradigmatically or in the mundane world, it would make no sense, because son cannot be, older than his father. That makes no sense. But only if you think, from the Buddhist cosmological sense, that actually sense is possible to make. Because after all, remember, those were Buddha's sons, because they actually grew from Buddha and they become enlightened because of Buddha. So they were his dharma sons, and if you are bodhisattvas, they were dharma daughters. But they were, of course, Buddhas attained Buddha many millions of years ago. So that's how the situation is. Now, this would make sense only with the paradigm of the world that we were talking about. Now, and this is not so different from us. We are trapped in this samsara again and again, right? And if said trapped in the samsara means that we are always there, billions and billions of years. we don't believe, we think there are, Buddha has been here long, many eons, but we think that we are just here this life. No, we have always been here. Actually, we don't remember, and we have no clue what states we lived, states of life that we left. But if you look deeply, this is a meditate, right? So meditate. First thing you have to understand is you have to 5 aggregates. When you understand 5 aggregates, first thing is the material aggregate. Material aggregate, earth element. Then fire element, water element, air element. What else? Conscious element. Everything inside is outside. So when this thing decomposes, it just actually disperses into the universe and stayed in different existence, different form of existence. Which means even if you don't accept Buddhist literal notion of rebirth, the idea is that we are never born, strictly speaking, as a new kind of from non-existent to something. There is no that. Birth is not like becoming something from nothing. And so is death not something. Death is not something becoming nothing. And usually, if you in the West, particularly after Epicureans, right? People thought that death. I mean, Epicureans' definition is death. Well, death is nothing to us. After all, when you die, you're not dead. When you are there, when you are alive, death is not. When you're dead, life is not. So that doesn't bother us. We don't have to worry about that. That's how the Epicureans define that. I mean, of course, fundamental problem there is death is understood death is understood as to be some sort of event that actually happened at the very end. Yes, truly, to a certain extent, that is the case. But more importantly, that is every moment that actually allows us to live. That is because of death. Death is a different expression of living. In other words, death is basically a change. For this reason, fundamental Buddhist liberation or Buddhist enlightenment is understanding impermanence, because understanding impermanence allows us to actually allows us this flexibility to choose and to become self-mastery. The fact that we have no self-mastery is because we haven't basically understood our own life, the nature of this impermanent nature of existence. So if we apply this actually generally, then Buddha is not the only picture. We can see our own life. So there's a Zen. There's a Zen question which was something like this: what is your face like before your grandma breath before your grandmother was born. Does it make sense? What was your face look? What does your face look like before your grandmother was born? Would have make no sense ordinarily, unless you do thinking in a radically different way. Because you were there only during the time of your grandmother. You may be part of grandmother's skin or part of grandmother's blood, of course, part of grandmother's thinking. And then grandmother sort of participated or maybe transformed in your mother's form, and then mother's form. You can see our face in the grandmothers. And can't we? There's a genetic hereditary. Parents sort of resemble the kids because of hereditary. So you could say this. But deeper question is, I mean, you can answer only this question only if you actually think the way a Buddhist thought of the cosmology, that life and death are always two different ends, two different coins, sides of the same coin that resembles continuation and existence. There is no annihilation, there is no transformation, and is there transmigration. People think, okay, there is one solid entity that goes from one life to another. That is denied fundamentally. So there is neither transmigration, nor is there annihilation, but it's a continuity and transformation. If you take this picture, then of course, your face, you can see your face, your own face, when your grandmother was alive. You should be able to see, of course, our own face. So somebody dies, you want to say, okay. And we must say, okay, because of the loss of life, I was just recently consoling a friend of mine and saying, look, your sister is still with you in the form of air. If you buried her, maybe so early in the form of earth, she's become part of earth, part of air. They rebreathe, and gradually, maybe plants will come out from where the body was, where the body buried, if body was buried. Then, of course, plants stays in the form of plants, still very much alive. You really don't have to take Buddhist sort of reincarnation seriously there, but generally, the idea that nothing can be destroyed. Because we cannot destroy anything. We might say, okay, I've destroyed this, but we can, to a certain extent, destroy something, but we cannot make something non-existent. That's the point. So why should we actually think that as some sort of becoming non-existent? Because that sends chills. People are scared because all of a sudden you become non-existent. You were something before, now you become non-existent. You become non-being. Not case here, in this case. Anyway, so these are kind of interestingly related. Okay, so anyway, this now, this last portion, even though the all-present believes whatever the Buddha says, future bodhisattvas on hearing this will doubt it and as a result be reborn in the lower realms. And so he asked Buddha to explain how this can be so. So now this perhaps tells a different generation. Transformation, different types of folk. So we are transforming in a fundamentally different way. I mean, if you think about last 20, 30 years during my own life, the whole world completely transformed, especially economically, absolutely fundamentally transformed. And that transformation will continue. Maybe you might have a technological revolution, and maybe sometimes there might be a revolution that is so apocalyptic that all the technology might be lost. We might have start all over again. Who knows? It's a transformation based on the continuation. So, and here Sutra was talking about, during the time of Buddha, bodhisattvas believe what Buddha says, because there is no reason to doubt what Buddha was saying, because Buddha doesn't have nothing to, no selfish sort of agenda to achieve. So then why should Buddha lie? Which means why should we doubt? But in the future, he says, there might be actually people who, bodhisattvas, geared towards the commitment for all beings, but still may not actually trust the Lotus Sutra. I don't claim to be bodhisattva. I'm not a bodhisattva, but I do have some issues with the sutra. And probably if you read, you do have some, because there are some sort of sections which make no sense. Some sections which are deeply sectarian, actually, in the sutra. So I have this the problem with that. Ordinary beings are like us. And you know, even if bodhisattvas in this age would have doubt with this sutra, or ordinary beings, of course, no problem. Now, this one is perhaps related also largely with what I just talked about, the cosmological, different way of thinking the cosmology, much more flexible, multidimensional, even maybe four-dimensional, that their life doesn't have one dimension, there's so many different dimensions, and that their life is there is no specific end, that there is no specific beginning. And that's why beginningless universe, endless universe. Remember these things you have, I'm sure you have heard many, many times. And there's a reason for why beginningless, why endless. Lifespan of the Tathagata. The Bodhisattva asked the Buddha to explain what his life, his long life means. Now this, because remember, billions of years he got enlightened, but still somehow he shows up. Shows up all of a sudden in Bodh Gaya. How? He said that he had attained Buddhahood countless continents of eons ago, but stated that he had only recently attained it in order to guide beings, and therefore that was not a lie. Now, of course, we could accuse Buddha of lying, because to a certain extent, when he was enlightened long before, why is it that I have actually literally displays as if it's a new event? So it says he appears to pass into nirvana, but does not. And this is also not a lie, but to prevent beings from being complacent. Now, if you look at this one, he appears to pass into nirvana, but does not. Why? Because generally, sometimes nirvana, remember, one definition of nirvana is to become extinct. Now, if you look this picture that I was talking about, the transformation, death as a transformation, and any death as a transformation, then actually there is no extinction. Extinction of the psychological content, yes, attachment is extinct, aversion extinct, and moha and ignorance is extinct, but not the continuation of existence, stuff that we are made up of. So it means Buddha, even though it becomes nirvana, attained nirvana, and there was extinction psychologically of those contents that actually are samsaric in nature, but the existence does not become non-existent. So it is not lie. So therefore, there is no surprise that actually the Buddha, there was millions and millions of years enlightened, but still shows up and displays. Why does this do that? Because to prevent beings from being complacent. Because if we might think, okay, if Buddha doesn't die and shows his parinirvana, and people might think that actually things can be much more stable. But then people say, okay, even if Buddha dies, even Buddha has to die. So I'm an ordinary person, I will certainly die. That, of course, sends a very strong signal. So that pushes practice much more rigorous, taking time much more seriously, because otherwise we might run out of time. So that's in order to prevent that kind of thing, of course, Buddha displays. He gives the parable of a doctor whose sons have been poisoned. He has the antidote, but some of his sons will not take it because their minds are affected. Their minds are affected because they think that they are not going to die. Not today anyway. I won't die today. I can just give you a sign. I mean, I can written, written chat. People sometimes say that out of very confidently. Sometimes, of course, they don't die, but sometimes, yeah, millions of people are dying every minute. So maybe there might be some people who actually who might have given their signature. The point is that, of course, he then goes away and sends them to the news that he has died. So what happens here? Buddha gives this a parable. A doctor has a lot of sons, and basically they were poisoned. And then, of course, doctor giving them antidote. And their sons think that they are very strong, they won't die, and they don't take it. But then because they were all poisoned, they were given a wrong message. What kind of wrong message? That his father died. His doctor was because of the poison. And then all of a sudden, they were scared. They thought they will die too, because if the father died because of poison, they might die too. So then start taking the antidote. And then what happened? It was revealed that the doctor didn't die. That is like exactly like the lifespans of the Tathagata, explaining that death, in the death, nothing is things don't become nothing. It just transformed. Except that you, of course, here the transformation is transformation from a samsaric to nibbana, transformation from unhappy states to more happier states. That's the goal of Buddhist soteriological goal. But doesn't mean that death. So that means that the presupposition is that, of course, death is still a continuation, just as life is a continuation. So in a sense, we have a very different understanding of life and sort of birth and death. Birth and death always go together, right? That's why you can see, again, a very different paradigm of what death is, what life is, in contrast with the contemporary modern, or even our so-called perspective, what life and death is. Because people think life is celebrated, death is somehow abhorrent, death is something that needs to be hidden away, it's something that is bad. Now here, death is bad only because we fail to understand it. But if we really want to avoid that bad death, we need to understand what life is. And what life is to understand this in-moment, constant changing moment. It is this understanding of constant change that allows us to actually fundamentally change the nature of our death. So if we try to run away from that, there's no way to avoid bad death. So Buddhist talks about good death and bad death, only not because bad death is some sort of annihilation and good death is somehow promotion. No, both are equal, same type of death. Death, namely, is a continuation. But one continuation, bad death is a continuation from samsaric to samsaric. Good death is death from discontinuation of samsaric to much more enlightened. Okay, so then they then realize the value of what he has given to them and take the antidote. The doctor then reveals to them that he's still alive. In the same way, the Buddha uses skillful methods and should not be called a liar. Okay, so we should never call Buddha a liar. Intention, of course, there is just like this noble doctor, right? Okay. Any questions in chapter 6? I mean, of course, here chapter 6 fundamentally presupposes this fundamentally different notion of death. Because then, if you understand that, then of course it's no surprise that Buddha was long gone, long ago, fully enlightened, and still kind of still here. And we make things exactly us, but in a much more low plane. We have been here around billions and billions of years, and we'll be here around billions of years. Except that we won't be, as an ordinary being, we won't remember, whereas Buddha actually remembers. That's the difference. Buddha has knowledge of where he has been, when he became fully enlightened, and at what state. But for us, they look like our existence, different types of existence, in oblivion, because they are not the domain of our memory. They have been a part of the experience and still fundamentally part of experience. And that's why our evolving psychological encyclopedia that we have been basically building, the historical agent, or that carries so much of information in us, have been here billions and millions of years. Right? So that's the existence, and that existence is not annihilated because of death. Okay, then chapter 16, the existence of marriage. Now this is related to the same chapter. Remember here, same question: what is the merit? What is the amount of merit that is accumulated from listening to, or maybe practicing, or taking the Lotus Sutra seriously? Buddha tells Maitreya that hearing this technique, teaching Lotus Sutra, on his lifespan has caused countless bodhisattvas to attain various levels of accomplishment. Miraculous events also occurred wherever the Buddhas who had gathered were present. Buddha states that hearing these teachings and believing it bring an inconceivably greater merit than practicing the first 5 perfections for eons. This looks too hyperbolic. I was thinking about trying to understand the reason, but quite hard actually. I couldn't get it. Maybe if you say that, if you try to practice perfection, 5 perfections for eons yourself, and not actually applying it, because after all, teaching this sutra and practicing it isn't applied, whereas the later one, but it says that practicing 5 perfections for eons. I don't see this as a contradictory, but actually the way it is phrased is more or less like contradictory. So I'm not sure how to make what to make of that. Anyway, those who have faith in the teaching will see the Buddha teaching in this world as a pure realm filled with bodhisattvas. Those who carry the text on their shoulder are carrying the Buddhas, and they do not need to build stupas or temples. And those who have this devotion to the sutras have made vast offerings in the presence of the Buddha. Perhaps one explanation is here, because to a certain extent in this particular chapter, where your devotionalism is the primary subject of discourse, and that's what you emphasize, then maybe that's after all devotion, because devotion, if devotion has such a power, you're just practicing, just without any question, you're fully concentrated because you follow Buddha's teaching, and especially these the teaching of Lotus Sutra and Ekayana doctrine. Maybe that has a special effect. And one of the reasons why this may be one tentative explanation is because what is said down there. So he says, those who recite the sutras, wholeheartedly, do not need to build stupas or anything like that. As if you were carrying your Buddha on your shoulder all the time, just because you are basically reciting this sutra. This partly explain, of course, devotionalism that we're talking about, East Asian Buddhism, especially Pure Land Buddhists, basically just reciting the Buddha's name, name a particular Buddha, and then of course they think that that is enough to give, to continue their existence in the life of devas. Okay, they will develop excellent qualities and will attain Buddhahood. Chaitas should be built in honor of the Buddha who ever teachers of the sutra have been. So again, different stupas or chaitas or different types of mausoleums. I don't know if they will call mausoleums. Different types of representation needs to be built for the people who Buddhas or Buddhists who teaches this. So essentially, I think the chapter 16 literally emphasize or stresses the importance that studying Lotus Sutra would have incalculable merits that has been created, generate out of it, which lead to direct realization and far exceeding the perfection of sort of practicing the first five perfections for aeons. Why first five perfections? Why not last? So that means perfection of wisdom is excluded, right? Yeah, maybe that's actually, yeah. Because if there is a perfection of wisdom is missing, then you could say you cannot never actually perfectly practice five perfections. Because perfection of wisdom is the I. On all the other perfections, let's say, giving, perfections of morality, perfections of patience, perfection of exertion, perfection of concentration, they are all visionless. They don't have eyes. They don't have, they cannot themselves see. They're all expressed as a blind. So they can only be transcended when the perfection of wisdom is added to them. So if that's missing, then of course maybe, yeah, in that sense, I suppose, because still it becomes up a, it's sort of much like devotional practice. All right. Any questions regarding chapter 16?
Sonam,
Yes.
do you mind? I just, in saying about the six perfections, is when you think about the five perfections before that come before the perfection of wisdom, isn't it the practice of the five perfections that are the cause for the sixth perfection?
I think, some texts certainly say that is true, because in fact, remember, Shantideva, when we read Shantideva, that Shantideva very clearly says, he says, the reason why we cultivate five perfections is to generate sixth perfection, namely wisdom, right? Because he says there are five other perfections of preliminary work, tasks, with the aim to develop sixth perfection. There's one way of understanding. Certainly, I think many of the texts, even not only Shantideva, but also if you read Chandrakirti's Madhyamika Avatara, sixth chapter, he say exactly like that. But then there is a slightly different way of understanding, and alternative understanding. Alternative understanding is that each perfection, you can cultivate each perfection together, all perfection together. Okay, that's the good example is this. And there are different explanations, but they are not contradictory. Sometimes, like for a meditator, people say, okay, if you're a meditator, first you need to attain samadhi. You need to attain full samadhi. And usually Tibetan interpretation is like that. So usually they would do 6 months of shamatha, just meditation on the breath. In the exercise that we are doing, shamatha is basically the meditation of calmness, calm abiding, for 6 months. Because the expectation within the 6 months, you attain samadhi, single-pointed attention, and then you move to the vipassana. So there's one way. You basically cultivate shamatha as a full-blown shamatha, very firm mastery of mind, and then move to the next to cultivate the wisdom. But unfortunately, the problem with that is you need 6 months. What are those people who, like us, who can't afford 6 months? Not forget about 6 months, 10 months, 10 days. Most of us can't afford 10 days. So that actually method does not suit most of us individuals, especially householders. Which means for householders, remember this technique that we are talking about, you are not only observing the breath as a calm abiding practice, you're not only observing this breath, observing it to develop some samadhi. So basically you're observing the breath single-pointedly to develop a single-pointed and sustained attention. That's shamatha aspect, samadhi aspect, so that we can develop a single-pointed attention. So important, right? But the other aspect of the practice is you must make sure that you actually are aware of the breath, the nature of the breath, understand the nature of the breath. Going in, coming out, whether it is long, whether it is short, understanding that is already integrated. So basically, which means that is the wisdom aspect, vipassana aspect, which means whenever you basically observe the breath, both with a concentration, but at the same time, awareness of the nature of the breath, you have fused both samadhi and the wisdom together, right? So in the same way, the another way of explaining five perfection is that, or six perfection is that actually all of the perfection starts from the very, together. When you try to develop, say, develop giving, generosity, you have a certain understanding, certain wisdom. There is certain wisdom there already. Wisdom of not only sharing, but also wisdom of, wisdom of egolessness. Otherwise, you preserve, you keep all of them to yourself. If there is no sense of sharing, some sense of selflessness. So then, of course, with that, gradually, wisdom is there, and also the skillful aspect is there, and gradually we develop these two together. That's another mode, and this word called a Tibetan model is Thakchoe Sundil. Thakchoe Sundil means method and wisdom both are fused together, or Shilak Sundil, wisdom, concentration. Shamatha and vipassana both fused together, taken as a sort of, let's say, simultaneously together as a practice. So that's can be, actually another way to explain. Okay, so either way, I think these are not contradictory, but actually different ways of doing it, and we can use whichever actually suits. So let's say another example is when we go for 10-day retreat, shamatha meditation is for like first 3-4 days. You just develop shamatha, single-pointed awareness, and when you start single-pointed awareness, you basically develop very concentrated mind with awareness. And then once you start feeling bodily sensation, within 3.5 or 4 days, you should be able to feel the the body. You should be able to develop bodily sensation, and then you can move to the next stage where you use bodily sensation to awaken. So that's how you move from shamatha meditation to vipassana. That's how actually our teacher teaches. But if it's for 20 days, let's say 20-day retreat, then first 11 days, first 7 days for shamatha first. Just shamatha, namely focus on the breath. And again, breath, remember both techniques are involved, awareness of the breath at the same time concentration. And then after in the 8th day, you will be introduced to vipassana to allow, observation of the bodily sensation. So that's actually depending on how long your retreat sessions are, and then of course, but there are still, of course, different emphasis. Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. So what time now? Chapter 17. This is teaching the merit of rejoice. So it's again following up, literally following through the same discussion. So, namely that what if, how do you rejoice or celebrate the merits that you make out of reciting Sutra? Maitreya asked the Buddha how much merit is being created from rejoicing in hearing the Sutra. Just an anecdote. When Bodhidharma, remember Bodhidharma went to China from India in the 5th century, he met Chinese Emperor Wu. And Chinese Emperor was deeply into Lotus Sutra anyway, because Kumara Jiva and those famous Indian scholars who went to China made Lotus Sutra very famous. So there was already a very deep-seated devotionalism in Chinese Buddhism. When Bodhidharma arrived, and Bodhidharma was first asked this question by the Chinese emperor, because Chinese emperor met Bodhidharma, and Bodhidharma was asked, how much merit do I create out of building all those monasteries? He built a pen about 1,200 out of monasteries, and printing out all the Buddhist scriptures. And he wanted to know from this Indian master how much merit he has claimed. And Bodhidharma's answer was no merit. There was a shock. I was suddenly shocked to the emperor. Boldness of this Indian guy, basically saying that this emperor, you might have done something wonderful, but he said no merit. But Buddha doesn't give this answer, of course. Buddha said, oh yes, enormous merit in this sutra. Because remember, that answers, the reason that interesting is because Zen path and devotional path are very different. Zen path is a part of Dhyana yoga, literally part of wisdom, attainment, not sort of devotionalism. Whereas this sutra sometimes, of course, emphasis on devotion. So where that's why very different in the reply. So Maitreya, when Maitreya asked the Buddha, Buddha says, Buddha gave the parable of someone who hears the teaching and repeats it to someone who repeats it to someone else, and so on until it is heard by a fifth person. Even if they only hear one line of the verse, the merit is far greater than that of a person who satisfies all the beings in 400,000 realms with the gifts for 80 years and then bring them to Arhat. That's enormous merit. I mean, literally. But he says that it still exists. If you're able to find, if you teach the sutra, recite the sutra, and then you pass somebody else, and somebody passes, and then you get to the fifth person, 50th, is it 50th person? Then the amount of merit is incalculable. So you can see, of course, that response is fundamentally different from the response that Bodhidharma gave. The merit such a person would accrue would not even be a quintillion of merit of the one who rejoiced in hearing one line of verse that had passed on through 50 people. So if you have people who have to rejoice, of course, just remember, rejoice is one of the four Brahma Viharas. You got it. Or sometimes we say limitless. Divine dwellings, Brahma Viharas. Limitless compassion, limitless love, limitless equanimity, and limitless rejoice. Rejoice usually is associated with also as an antidote against jealousy, especially our own competitors. We have a hard time celebrating their achievements. We always like to kind of celebrate their downfall, but when they are successful, we find it hard to relish. So usually rejoicing is a sign that when we are able to rejoice even of our adversaries, then it is a sign that we are actually progressing in our practice. We are gradually dismantling our sense of adversarial aversion, or let's say hatred towards our, and that can sometimes be very difficult to overcome. Anyway, in this case, just rejoicing the merit of somebody who accumulated that actually can be extremely powerful. Those who go to the temple to listen to the sutra, even briefly, will have excellent carriages in their future life. Yeah, if they sit down and they will have thrones of their deities and kings. Well, okay, if you want deities and kings, just recite sutra. And if they make someone else listen to it, even for a moment, they will have an excellent physical body in the future. Well, okay, so if you want to have a physical, beautiful, attractive person, we know that we know what the solution is. Read the Lotus Sutra many times and make other people do that. So that's what Sutra says. I don't have explanation. I don't know. How do you take it? Okay. Any questions there? Chapter 17. basically makes the point that actually rejoicing somebody else is doing the job of working hard, reciting, or reading or studying, and just rejoicing it actually can be very powerful. And then chapter 18 is another way of expressing the rejoice, especially actually showing the impact that sutra reading will have, and that is to purify our 6 ayatana. Ayatanas are kejituk, or the sources, basically domains of our cognitive resources. I suppose they are all the cognitive resources. Buddha tells the Bodhisattva, satas sam ami abhiyukta, that those who are devoted to the sutra will attain numerous special qualities of purified faculties, which are those of the body sense and not yet divine faculties. Now, this is important. So when Buddha says, when this text says that the purity of the 6 ayatana, 6 sources, right? 6 sources are generally like eyes, eyes and the visual objects. So vision and visual object. Ears and the sound. Nose, taste, tongue and the nose, taste, nose and smell, tongue and the taste, body and tactile object. Those are the sources, right? And usually we add 6 more consciousness to that, and then make the 12 ayatanas. But here it's just just those 6 senses and 6 sensory objects. That's what they are, actually, to put it in a sort of more simple term. So the distinction is this. This is interesting because usually these 6 ayatanas or sources, sensory organs get purified as a result of meditation. And so you attain sometimes called divine hearing, divine vision. You will be able to hear some sounds that ordinarily you won't hear. You will be able to hear some vision that you ordinarily won't hear because of certain realizations that you have. And they are the divine, in the sense they are actually usually a type of visions and abilities that are associated with the divine beings, namely gods. Gods all have those things. They have the ability to do that, but humans don't have. The humans can acquire those qualities usually out of meditation, especially deep samadhi. Samadhi meditation gives those skills. Now, the interesting thing in this sutra is basically just reading the sutras actually gives those purify our 6 ayatana sources. And it said, not yet divine faculties. So that's an important distinction. Those bodies can be purified, but not yet. Which are, which are those of the body senses and not yet divine faculties. Nevertheless, 800 qualities of the faculty of eye, including seeing everything, everywhere, seeing everywhere, seeing everyone in the world of billions of worlds. There are 1200 of qualities of oral perception, which include hearing every sound, both those produced by beings and natural sounds in the world realm of billions of worlds, without being overwhelmed by them. Now, this seems to be important because this is a qualification. Without being overwhelmed by them. Otherwise, imagine that you hear all the sounds. Or what happens in the city? Just in the hoba, or just imagine that you hear all the birds chirping all at once, or human beings, all different types of human beings talking all at once. I think that's going to be overwhelming. So interesting on the one hand that they are able to develop this the ability to hear. Whenever they concentrate, they have the ability. But if they don't concentrate, then of course specific that sound that they will hear. So that's why they don't get overwhelmed. Otherwise, usually says omniscience, right? One of the Buddha's quality, or even omniscience, knows everything. Well, when you know everything, you have chairs, tables, computers, laptop, and houses, trees, everything comes all in once. That would be very confusing, seems to me. I'm not sure if that's a quality. But anyway, usually that is prevented because that doesn't happen only when they actually focus of course, then the specific knowledge shows up, just like this. So they don't get overwhelmed. Otherwise, if you're worried that, oh, I don't go in there because it seems to be so overwhelming, just like some patients who have some psychological episodes where they start hearing all sorts of noise, they got totally overwhelmed, lost. So I'm sure that these kind of realizations are not like that kind of a problem. The 800 qualities of all olfactory perceptions include sensing all smells of beings, matters in the world, realm of billion worlds, 1200 of qualities, 100 qualities of gustatory perception includes all tastes becoming divine, and faculty of the tongue, teaching the Dharma with a voice that will delight everyone, both humans and non-humans, inspire their venerations. The 800 qualities of the sensory faculty of the body include having purified body, the color of pearl, and seeing within one's body all the beings within a billion worlds. Imagine that you, within your own body, you're able to see all beings. Won't you be totally overwhelmed? All the bugs. Just joking. I mean, this is supposed to be qualities, right? The idea is that, of course, they even with that ability, they're able to do that, but they don't get overwhelmed. The 1200 qualities of the mental faculty include understanding the many meanings contained within one verse and teaching them for as long as a year. Just one verse, teaching as long as a year. Knowing all the thoughts of all beings in billion worlds, such that one's teaching is always correct. Well, look at that. These are beautiful ones, but some others are interesting. So anyway, that's the beauty also, actually, one of the benefit of the reciting of the Lotus Sutra. And you can see so much of benefits. And they actually looks like benefit from becoming almost literally like awakened or liberated. Okay, so any question? I think we are run out of time, 12 o'clock. Let me see. Okay, can we finish this? And then next week, I think we meant only 5 chapters to finish. So this benefits of period of 6 ayatanas, usually, traditionally they are actually associated with a deep transformation. You can see it was, this is a transformation, a very fundamental structural change in the ability of our senses to be able to do beyond what they usually do. In ordinary person, I mean, even our auditory ability cannot exceed more than dogs, because dogs have enormous auditory ability and then a sensing ability. And then we can see, of course, that from that we can infer that yes, if it is, we can cultivate such ability. And usually these are the qualities that associate with the deep samadhis, deep dhyanas. If you actually do a deep samadhi, deep cultivation of concentration, mastery of mind, these qualities at one attain. But here they actually developed, essentially attributed as quality of those who have cultivated a deep familiarity with the sutra. Okay, now chapter 19, Saddha Paribuddha. The Saddha Paribuddha is interesting because now this time I'm reading, I'm not usually I use the downloaded one. This one time I'm using the live. So when you use the live from 84,000 translating the word Buddha, you can basically, if you look and you can see the Tibetan and Sanskrit. Saddha Paribuddha basically means Thakchoe Nyepa, Tibetan. Thakchoe Nyepa essentially means somebody who's being ridiculed all the time. So there's a Bodhisattva. There's an interesting, there's a Tibetan, there's a never ridiculed in, if you actually take the Chinese translation of the original Sanskrit. And the Tibetan one is constantly ridiculed. And they think that never ridiculed seems to be more contextually relevant. This is the name of Bodhisattva and happened with Buddha himself, in the distant whose name has been translated to mean constantly ridiculed. Sada Paribuddha. Sada means literally constant. Also, sometimes could mean truth. The Tibetan and Burner from the Sanskrit, and the Chinese translation will come from translate never ridiculed. That's a big difference. Basically, Sada can ever be as eternal, ever. You say ever ridiculed. Instead of never, I would have, because then constantly ridicule and never ridicule, they are far, because they are literally opposite, right? Whereas if you translate as ever ridiculed or constantly ridiculed, then they look a little bit closer. Anyway, maybe, of course, this Sanskrit Sada may actually support both Vedic. At least looks like. Okay. So this chapter, basically, Buddha tells the Bodhisattva Maha Stampa Prapta that those who revile adherence to this sutra will experience a bad result of being mute, while those who support will have purified faculties. Those who, in chapter 18, we have seen those who actually support and not only encourage, they actually will have a very purified, refined faculties, whereas those who say offensive things against the sutra will have the reverse result, and namely, will have a mute faculty. He says that long ago there was a world in which there was a series of millions of Buddhas, all named Bhishma, Garijat, Swaraja, Garijita, Swaraja. Right? Bhishma, Garijita, Swaraja. So that's the name of all the Buddhas. When the Dharma of the first of these was coming to an end, there was a Bodhisattva called Sataparibuddha. Basically, remember there are so many different Buddhas, and Buddhas, each Buddhas teaches, and they literally run their own course of their reign, and when the Dharma of the first of these coming to an end, there was a Bodhisattva called Sataparibuddha who endured condemnation of others, monastics, and lay followers. So this Bodhisattva, for some reason, was being always condemned. Sounds like a Shantideva, right? We know the Shantidev, 8th century Indian poet, also practitioner, of course, monk, who composed Bodhicharya Avatara, Bodhisattva's way of life. Apparently was always ridiculed because of his seeming behavior. He has the reverse timetable. He always live in the day and they wake up and does his work in the night. So people think that he's just like, useless, kind of parasite. And so he was always nicknamed different things. And he was at the end of his life, or at least at a certain point, in order to bring that culmination, he was, just to embarrass him, people asked, all the monks ganged up and said that Shantideva to give up the teaching. And not only that, made all of the ropes put together and make a very hard throne so that he couldn't rise up. But for Shantideva, of course, a very mature meditator, and not only that, a very accomplished one. So then basically did something just to, press, and then he easily rise up on the seat, and then gave eloquent and one of the most celebrated texts of Bodhicharya Avatara. And it said that around 9th chapter, he basically gradually disappeared from the throne and ascended and disappeared. And this 10th chapter was later sort of supplemented. Anyway, so looks like Sataparibuddha is one of those, fits in this kind of picture where he was constantly condemned. And then when he was dying, he heard that the words of the white lotus of the Good Dharma coming from the air. Now again, this is all about the White Lotus Sutra. And as a result, he was constantly condemned. And what had that is, when he was about to die, he actually he taught Lotus Sutra, taught those who had previously reviled him. So he was almost dying, but without any hatred or anger towards those people who constantly ridiculed him, critiqued him. He taught Lotus Sutra and lived on for millions of years, teaching this sutra during the time of millions of succeeding Buddhas until finally he attained the enlightenment. So, and the Shakyamuni reveals that he was Sattapariputa, and also that those who revile him, how do you pronounce it? Revile? Am I reading properly? I'm sorry, Lindy? Revealed or reviled?
Reviled. It's not revealed. It's
reviled.
Reviled, yes. Still ridicule. It's a type of ridicule, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you. So yes, and then basically Buddha said that actually Sattapariputa, who was constantly being ridiculed, ever ridiculed or constantly ridiculed, depending on which version you read, was himself. And he, and he said those who were there to ridicule him were among his students in this life. Perhaps bodhisattvas. He didn't name them, but so that's actually interesting, because that's the difference between us and the Buddha. Buddha's existence, continuation, and transformation, just like us. But we only have the very limited perspective because of our knowledge extent only in this life. Because we forget everything what went before, and what is to come, we have no idea. Buddhas do have this. Otherwise, of course, insofar as existence per se and continuation per se, death and birth works exactly the same, whether it's a Buddha or ordinary beings. The difference is Buddhas, of course, have heightened existence, no longer subject to the samsaric ups and downs. Whereas in our case, of course, our existence, since we don't have a control of our own mind, and our existence a lot less stable and involves a lot more challenges. So he encourages him to maintain and teach this sutra after he had passed into nirvana. So that's again chapter 6, chapter 19 is all again celebration of the Lotus Sutra, and connecting this with the account of Buddha's past life as Sattapariputa, who although being ridiculed always, but constantly taught Lotus Sutra. And of course, he was Buddha making explicit link between his existence as a Shakyamuni and the Sattapariputa. So now, of course, if you ask this question, Shakyamuni Buddha and Sattapariputa, are they different entity or continuing existence? So of course the answer is continuity of changing manifestation or changing evolvement or transformation of Sattapariputa, right? Okay, so I think if the next time we did quite well until chapter 19. So almost like from chapter 14 to 19. So in the next section, we got, I think, unless we have a very notable section where we need to go, I think we will also do the same thing, because we might be able to, otherwise we might get stuck in a certain portion. So next time when we come back, chapter 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, and that's it. Oh, 7 chapters. We can work hard. Just concluding. Okay, so I'll stop sharing this here. Any final questions?
Not really a question, Sonam, but just sort of like for our reading, it's very good for us actually to go through all of that conclusion more than reading through all of the chapters, isn't it? In this, so just if you go to the conclusion that way, it gives a very good summary. Even when we're going back to look at the other chapters, it's still very nice to have that summary.
Absolutely, absolutely, because even before read the whole chapter, if you get time, definitely go through the chapter, because now we've got only few chapters. So make sure that you just get the whole feel of the sutra. I mean, as I said, I think there are, in those chapters that we covered, there's nothing very interesting, nothing that is very, nothing that stands out. But it's all about literally making the same point about the lotus, the importance of lotus sutras. And you can see actually how devotionalism grew out of this around Lotus Sutra in China. Makes a good sense. You can see the logic, but of course there are. If you think from rational standpoint, you will see a fair bit of problem with the sutra. That's okay, because sutra, you really don't have to attribute this to Buddha, just as traditional Buddhists do. I do have some, myself find it's a sort of a problem, because those sutras actually were appeared much later. So even though traditional Mahayanists accept them as attribute them to Buddha's words, I mean, I had a problem. I have a problem actually taking that line, literally.
Yeah.
So you might have different views, but that's okay. It's totally acceptable. So if you get time, just try to read those 5 sutras. I haven't read them yet, so I don't know exactly what to expect from this. We are all together there. So I will read those sutras, and hopefully there might be something interesting there. But if not, at least we will bring to the conclusion that this quite a long extended sutra study.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you, Sonam. That would be wonderful.
Thank you, and thank you for your patient listening and attention and participation.
Thank you. Okay, so Sonam, you can lead us in a dedication meditation. Yeah.
Okay, brief dedication.
Thank you.
Fully breathing, mindfully breathing. This time, when you feel some unease or distress or agitation, you can breathe them out. Otherwise, Look at the bright side of your life. Rejoice in your life, what you have achieved. What you have. And for the last 2 hours, reflecting, thinking about Dhamma. Enormous luxury. Trying to generate some positive thoughts. No tension, no fear, no anger, no animosity. Feel relaxed, contented, satisfied. At ease, at peace within oneself. Then you can think about, visualize your loved ones sitting next to you, around you, all your loved ones, living, breathing, alive, not alive, all of them. Smiling at them. Send your love, vibration, positive vibration from your heart. Warm energy from your heart for their well-being, for their happiness. In all directions. And then you can think about all your colleagues, friends, sitting again around you. Sharing your merit. Share all the merits you have accumulated, positive thinking you have accumulated in your all your accomplishments. Dedicate. And then think about all other beings. Your competitors, adversaries, aliens, unknowns, animals, birds, even the ferocious animals. breaking all the barriers. Share your love, share your merit. May all beings be happy. May all beings prosper. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings be fearless. May all beings attain self-mastery. May all beings be liberated, fully liberated from the suffering, psychological, physical, free from suffering, free from fear. May all beings enjoy peace, harmony. May all beings be liberated. Become fully enlightened. Realize the potential. And may I be able to contribute in any way I can to make that realization possible. To Sarvamangalam. Bhavatu Sarvamangalam. Bhavatu Sarvamangalam. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonam. I appreciate it greatly once again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for joining us.
Okay, thank you, Sonam.
So, next session will be November 19.
November 19th, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, see you everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Yes, bye.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye everyone.
Karma.